They arrested me, on my own land, surrounded by cows that trust me more than the local sheriff, and all because my new neighbor, Bethany Drake, HOA queen and full-time menace, decided my ranch was ruining the aesthetic. One week I'm milking cows, the next I'm being fined for unauthorized barn colors and livestock noise pollution. Ever been attacked with zoning laws and weaponized cookies? Stick around, because what started as petty HOA nonsense spiraled into something straight out of a legal thriller. Drop a comment with the worst HOA horror story you've heard or lived through. Let's see who had it worse, me or the goat farmer from Nebraska. The story starts on my ranch, Sunrise Ranch, about 40 minutes outside Austin, Texas. I bought this land 7 years ago when I got out of the Marines. It wasn't much back then, just 50 acres of scrubland with a broken-down farmhouse and some rusty fence posts. But I had a vision. I used every penny of my savings, plus a veteran's loan, to make it mine. I built every corner of this ranch with these hands, barns, fences, even the water lines I dug at night after construction shifts. This wasn't some family inheritance or trust fund project. This was blood, sweat, and determination, turned into something real. But this place became more than just property to me. I didn't just build a ranch here. I buried my dog Sarge under the old oak tree, carved my initials on the barn beam with my dad's pocket knife, and scattered my brother's ashes by the East Hill after he didn't make it back from Afghanistan. When storms knocked down my first fence, I rebuilt it stronger. When the drought of 2021 nearly broke me, I hand-watered every cow and prayed for rain. This land doesn't just belong to me. I belong to it. Every sunrise I've watched from this porch, every calf I've helped birth in that barn, every drop of sweat I've shed on this soil, it's all part of who I am. Some people collect trophies or bank accounts. I collect memories in acres. My daily routine was simple, and I loved every minute of it. 5 in the morning, I'd roll out of bed and head to the barn to milk the cows. The sun would be just peeking over the horizon, casting this golden light through the barn doors. I had 12 Holstein dairy cows that I sold milk to the local grocery stores and farmers markets. After milking, I'd fix whatever needed fixing. Broken fence posts, leaky water troughs. By evening, I'd sit on my porch with a beer, watching my cows graze in the pasture, feeling like the richest man alive. But about 3 weeks before Bethany showed up, something strange started happening. I'd be out doing my morning chores and spot a drone hovering over my cattle, just watching. No identifying markings, no obvious owner. The first time it happened, I figured it was some kid playing around with a new toy, but it kept coming back, always at dawn, always focused on my barn and pasture. I tried following it when it flew away, but it would disappear over the tree line toward the new developments. I asked around at the feed store, but nobody claimed ownership. Probably just some real estate folks documenting the area, old Pete behind the counter suggested. But something about it felt wrong. For the first time in 7 years, I started feeling like I wasn't the only one keeping tabs on my own property. The area had always been peaceful farm country, but things started changing after the pandemic. City folks from places like California and New York began moving to Texas in droves, buying up large plots of land and building massive houses. Most of them were decent people, just looking for more space and a slower pace of life. But then there was Bethany Drake. She moved from Malibu and built a $2.2 million mansion about half a mile from my ranch. White columns, circular driveway, the works. She drove a white Tesla and always looked like she was heading to a country club meeting, even when she was just checking her mailbox. The first time we met, I was fixing a section of fence along the property line when she walked over. She was wearing spotless white jeans and heels that had no business being in a pasture. "Hi there," she said, in this sickeningly sweet voice. "I'm Bethany Drake, your new neighbor. I was wondering if you might be interested in selling your property. I'd love to expand my gardens, and this would make such a beautiful landscape area." I looked up from the fence post I was setting and just stared at her for a moment. "Ma'am, this ranch isn't for sale. My family's been working this land and I plan to keep it that way." Her smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Oh well, if you ever change your mind, just let me know. I think this area has so much potential for improvement." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up and saw Bethany standing right in the middle of my pasture with a notebook and a measuring tape. She was just standing there, among my cows, writing things down like she owned the place. When she saw me coming, she waved cheerfully and called out, "Just getting familiar with the neighborhood." As I watched her make notes and take measurements, I realized the drone surveillance hadn't been random at all. Someone had been studying my property, learning my routines, documenting everything. That's when I knew this woman was going to be trouble, but I had no idea just how much trouble she was planning to cause. The first real sign of war came exactly 1 week later. I was having my morning coffee when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched a man in a postal uniform walk up to my door with an envelope so thick it looked like a small book. The return address read Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, which was strange because I'd never heard of any HOA in this area. We'd always prided ourselves on being outside city limits, away from all that bureaucratic nonsense. I signed for the certified letter, and as soon as the postal worker drove away, I tore it open. What I found inside made my blood run cold. 23 pages of violations, 23 pages of accusations about my non-compliant property maintenance and environmental hazards. According to this document, my grass was exceeding the maximum height of 6 inches in multiple areas. My cattle were creating offensive odors that negatively impact air quality for neighboring residents. My barn was architecturally inconsistent with community standards. They even had the nerve to cite me for excessive noise from livestock during early morning hours. At the bottom was a fine total of $1,500, due within 30 days. The letter was signed by Bethany Drake, chairwoman of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. The whole thing was printed on official-looking letterhead with legal language that would intimidate most people into compliance. I called 3 of my neighbors immediately. Old Jim Patterson had lived here for 30 years. HOA, he said. Son, there ain't never been no HOA out here. That's why we moved here, to get away from people telling us how to live on our own land. But when I called the Johnsons, who lived about a quarter-mile down the road, Mrs. Johnson sounded nervous. "Oh, Clay, yes, we did sign some papers last week. This nice lady came by and explained how it would help property values and keep the area nice. She said it was just a formality, that nothing would really change. She charmed them with cookies and fake smiles." My heart sank. I called 2 more neighbors and got the same story. Bethany had gone door to door while I was in town buying cattle feed, convincing people to sign up for an HOA that would protect their investment. And then I remembered, just last week, I'd helped the Johnsons fix their roof after that hailstorm. Refused any payment because that's what neighbors do. Now they wouldn't even look me in the eye when I drove past their house. That stung more than any fine. These were people I'd known for years, folks I'd shared beers with at backyard barbecues, whose kids I'd taught to ride horses. Bethany had turned them against me in a single conversation, with some cookies and smooth talk about property values. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. I wasn't just losing a legal battle, I was losing my community. The next day, I drove over to Bethany's mansion to have a conversation about this supposed HOA. When I pulled into her circular driveway, she was already waiting for me on her front steps, like she'd been watching for my arrival. She was dressed in all white again, white blouse, white pants, white shoes, and she had that same fake smile plastered on her face. "Clay, I was hoping you'd come by. Did you get our letter about the property improvements?" I held up the thick envelope. "Bethany, this is my ranch. I've been living here and following all the county regulations just fine. I never agreed to join any HOA." She tilted her head like she was talking to a confused child. "Oh, but Clay, this is for the betterment of the whole community. Surely you want to be a good neighbor." She gestured for me to follow her to a white patio table she'd set up in her front yard, complete with a stack of papers thick as a phone book. As she sat down, she opened a leather folder and started flipping through documents with practiced efficiency. "You see, Clay, when the majority of residents in a geographical area agree to form an HOA, it becomes legally binding for all properties within the defined boundaries. We have 6 signatures from your immediate neighbors, which constitutes a majority." She slid a map across the table, showing my ranch circled in red. "Your property falls well within our jurisdiction." The map looked professional, like something a lawyer might prepare, with precise boundary lines and legal descriptions. I stared at it, feeling my jaw clench. "This is ridiculous, Bethany. You can't just decide to control my property because you got a few people to sign some papers." But as she kept talking, pulling out more documents and citing various regulations, I realized she'd done her homework. She knew exactly what she was doing. I left that meeting feeling angry and confused, but I figured this was just some kind of power trip that would blow over. Maybe if I ignored it, she'd get bored and move on to some other project. I should have known better. During the drive home, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of my neighbors was standing in his yard talking to a woman I didn't recognize, and they both turned to stare at my truck, as I passed. When I waved, my neighbor quickly looked away and went inside his house. That's when I realized Bethany hadn't just gotten signatures. She'd been talking to people about me, probably filling their heads with stories about how my ranch was bringing down property values or creating health hazards. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I could already see it taking root in the community I'd called home for 7 years. The next morning, I would discover just how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. I thought Bethany was just trying to intimidate me with legal-sounding papers and big fines. I was wrong. 3 days after I refused to pay the HOA fees, I was in the middle of fixing a water trough when I heard vehicles pulling into my driveway. Through the barn door, I watched 3 people climb out of a white van. They were all wearing dark suits and carrying clipboards, cameras, and what looked like measuring equipment. The way they moved with such official purpose made my gut tighten with worry. These weren't casual visitors or neighbors stopping by to chat. They had the bearing of government officials on a mission. The leader of the group was a tall man with a thin mustache who introduced himself as an environmental compliance inspector. He had a badge clipped to his jacket pocket and spoke in the kind of monotone voice that screamed government bureaucracy. We're here to conduct a routine inspection of this agricultural facility based on community health and safety concerns that have been reported to our office. I asked to see some identification and a warrant, but he just handed me a business card with an official-looking logo and an address that I didn't recognize. Sir, this is a standard compliance check. We have full authority to inspect any agricultural operation that may be impacting community welfare. The business card looked legitimate, with embossed lettering and a phone number, but something about the whole situation felt off. For the next 2 hours, these 3 inspectors crawled over every inch of my property like they were investigating a crime scene. They measured the distance between my barn and the property line. Apparently 8 feet instead of the required 10 feet was a serious setback violation. They waved devices around like they were on CSI, poking soil and snapping pictures like my barn was a crime scene. They spoke in official jargon and threw around terms like environmental impact assessment and agricultural compliance protocols. But their measurements seemed arbitrary and their violations felt made up on the spot. The whole thing was theater. And sure enough, about halfway through their inspection, Bethany appeared. She came walking across the field wearing another pristine white outfit, carrying a small purse and moving carefully to avoid stepping in anything that might soil her shoes. "Oh my," she called out as she approached. "I hope everything is all right over here. I noticed the official vehicles and wanted to make sure there wasn't some kind of emergency." The lead inspector immediately perked up when he saw her, like a dog recognizing its owner. "Mrs. Drake, we're just conducting the environmental assessment you requested. We found several significant violations that will need to be addressed immediately." The way he spoke to her was completely different from his tone with me, respectful, almost deferential. I watched this little performance with growing anger and suspicion. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. These inspectors knew Bethany by name. They'd shown up right after I'd refused to pay her HOA fees, and their violations all seemed designed to create maximum hassle and expense for me. When I tried to ask questions about their procedures or request copies of their findings, they became evasive and defensive. "Sir, interfering with an official inspection is a serious offense. We suggest you cooperate fully or face additional penalties." But I caught something that made my blood run cold. As they were packing up their equipment, I overheard one of them talking quietly on his phone. "Yeah, we're done here, Mrs. Drake. The report will be ready by tomorrow morning." That evening, after the inspectors had left and delivered their formal report, with an additional $3,000 fine, I sat on my porch trying to make sense of what had happened. These people had shown up immediately after my conflict with Bethany. They'd known her personally, and they'd found violations that seemed specifically designed to make my life difficult. But it wasn't just that. That night, I caught a new drone on my security feed. This one had night vision and was equipped with what looked like professional surveillance gear. They weren't just inspecting anymore, they were surveilling, and someone was paying top dollar for military-grade equipment. This had escalated beyond neighborhood harassment into something that felt like corporate espionage. I decided to do some investigating of my own. I pulled out my laptop and searched for the company name on the business card they'd given me. What I found made me feel sick to my stomach. The address listed for Environmental Compliance Solutions was an empty lot on the outskirts of town. The phone number went to a disconnected voicemail. The company website looked professional, but had only been registered 2 weeks ago. These weren't real inspectors. They were actors, hired by Bethany to create fake violations and give her ammunition to use against me. And tomorrow, I was about to find out just how far she was willing to push this game. The realization that she had access to professional surveillance equipment and fake credentials made me understand that I wasn't dealing with an angry neighbor anymore. I was dealing with someone who had serious resources and absolutely no moral boundaries about how she used them. I spent that night researching everything I could find about fake inspections and HOA fraud. What I discovered made me realize I was dealing with someone far more calculating than I'd imagined. Bethany hadn't just randomly decided to mess with me. She'd studied the system and figured out exactly how to manipulate it. There were cases across the country of people using fake HOAs and phony inspections to pressure property owners into selling cheap. It was a sophisticated scam that preyed on people's trust in official-looking paperwork and government authority. Armed with my research and printouts proving the inspection company was fake, I decided to confront her directly. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me with her games anymore. The next morning, I drove straight to Bethany's house with a folder full of evidence. When she answered the door, she was wearing her usual white outfit and that infuriating smile. "Clay, what a pleasant surprise. I hope you're here to discuss resolving those violations we discovered yesterday." I held up my folder and looked her straight in the eye. "Bethany, I know those inspectors were fake. I know you hired them to create phony violations. This whole HOA thing is a scam, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating flash across her face before the sweet smile returned. "Oh my goodness, Clay, that's quite an accusation. I think you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this. Why don't you come inside and we can discuss this calmly?" She gestured toward her front door, but I noticed she was holding her phone in her other hand. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Bethany. I just want you to know that I'm onto your game. You can't intimidate me into selling my ranch with fake inspections and made-up fines." As I spoke, I saw her fingers moving on her phone screen like she was recording our conversation. That should have been a red flag, but I was too angry to think clearly. What I didn't know was that Bethany had been preparing for this moment. She'd positioned two of her friends as witnesses who were conveniently working in her garden nearby. She'd started recording our conversation before she even opened the door. And she had a script designed to make me say things that could be taken out of context. "Clay, I'm sorry you feel that way, but threatening me isn't going to solve anything," she said loudly enough for her friends to hear. "I haven't threatened anyone," I replied, but she continued. "I really think you need to calm down before someone gets hurt. Maybe you should go home and think about this rationally." The way she phrased everything made it sound like I was being aggressive and dangerous, when all I'd done was present evidence of her fraud. 30 minutes after I got home, I was in the middle of feeding my cows when I heard vehicles coming up my driveway. This time it wasn't fake inspectors. It was Deputy Mike Collins in his patrol car, followed by a second deputy I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I watched them get out and walk toward me with serious expressions on their faces. "Clay Dempsey?" Deputy Collins asked, even though he'd known me by sight for years. "Yes, sir, that's me." He pulled out a pair of handcuffs and started reading me my rights. "You're under arrest for harassment and making terroristic threats against Bethany Drake." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Terroristic threats? Mike, you know me. I've never threatened anyone in my life. I just went to talk to her about some fake inspections she's been running on my property. But Deputy Collins looked uncomfortable, like he was just following orders he didn't quite understand. "Clay, I've got a recording of you threatening Mrs. Drake and two witnesses who heard you say you weren't going to let her get away with something. She's claiming you made her fear for her safety." As he cuffed my hands behind my back, I looked around at my ranch, my cows standing in the pasture, my barn that I'd built with my own hands, my home that I'd worked so hard to create, and there, standing at the edge of my property line, was Bethany. She was talking to Deputy Collins about how dangerous I'd become and how concerned she was for the safety of the community. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just Bethany. It was the system. Cops who followed protocol without question, judges who saw prior arrests on a record and nothing else, neighbors who bought the official story because it was easier than thinking critically. She wasn't fighting me directly, she was using the rules to beat me, and she knew exactly which ones to twist. The badge meant authority, the paperwork meant legitimacy, the recording meant evidence. She'd turned the very institutions that were supposed to protect people like me into weapons against me. As they drove me away in the back of the patrol car, I stared out the window at my ranch, disappearing behind me. I felt completely helpless and alone. Bethany had played this perfectly. She'd created a situation where anything I said in my defense would look like more evidence of aggressive behavior. During the ride to jail, I heard Deputy Collins talking on his radio about the case, and one thing he said made my blood run cold. This is the third arrest this month for threats against the same complainant. 3 arrests. That meant Bethany had done this before, to other people. I wasn't her first victim, and I probably wouldn't be her last. Sitting in that jail cell for the next 48 hours, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be another person she steamrolled. I was going to fight back, but I was going to do it smart. The county jail wasn't exactly where I'd planned to spend my weekend, but it turned out to be exactly where I needed to be. My cellmate was a 70-year-old man named Earl Patterson, who'd been arrested for drunken disorderly conduct after losing his temper at a city council meeting. When I told him about my situation with Bethany Drake, his weathered face went pale. "Son, did you say Bethany Drake? Blonde woman, drives a white Tesla, talks like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth?" I nodded, and Earl sat down heavily on his bunk. "That woman destroyed my life 2 years ago." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and I could see his hands shaking as he spoke. Earl had owned a small ranch about 5 miles from mine. He'd raised horses and run a modest boarding operation for people who wanted to keep their animals outside the city. He moved in next door and immediately started complaining about everything: the smell, the noise, the property value impact of having horses nearby. First came the HOA that nobody remembered voting for. Then came the inspectors who found violations for everything from fence height to manure storage. Then came the fines that kept getting bigger and bigger. Earl's hands shook as he talked, but the worst part was when she started calling the police. Every few weeks she'd file a new complaint. Harassment, threatening behavior, animal abuse. All lies, but each time I got arrested, it went on my record. "You gotta understand, Clay," Earl continued, his voice breaking. "I wasn't just some guy with horses. I was the only person in 3 counties who knew how to treat a foundered mare or set a broken leg proper. Folks called me the horse whisperer for 40 years. Ranchers would drive 2 hours just to have me look at their animals. I had a reputation, a legacy." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "But after Bethany got done with me, after she got me branded as dangerous, unstable, a threat to the community, nobody would bring their horses anymore. Who wants to deal with someone the police keep arresting? I didn't just lose my income, son. I lost my identity, my standing in the community, everything that made me who I was." Earl stared at the concrete wall of our cell. "What really gets me is she didn't just destroy individual people. She's systematically destroying the character of our whole area. She's not collecting land, she's collecting history. Every ranch she forces out is another piece of real Texas culture that disappears forever. My grandfather taught me about horses on that land. I taught my son. Now it's gone, turned into some fancy garden where she grows organic kale for her dinner party." The bitterness in his voice was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, a deep grief for a way of life that was being erased. "But here's what really burns me up," Earl said, his voice getting quieter but more intense. "I saw pictures of one of her dinner parties in the local lifestyle magazine. Right there on page 3, my grandfather's barn, where I helped birth my first foal, now lit up with fairy lights and rich folks drinking organic wine, calling it rustic elegance. They even kept my father's branding iron nailed to the wall as a decoration." He laughed bitterly. "My father's brand, the one he designed himself, the one that marked our family's cattle for 60 years, is now a conversation piece for people who've never seen a real cow in their lives. She didn't just steal my land, Clay. She stole my heritage and turned it into entertainment. The system's set up to believe the complainer, especially when they're well-dressed and well-spoken like her," Earl continued. "Doesn't matter if you're innocent, doesn't matter if the charges get dropped. Each arrest makes you look more dangerous, more unstable. After 6 months of that treatment, my insurance company dropped me. My boarding clients left because they didn't want to deal with the drama. I lost everything and had to sell the ranch just to pay the legal fees." He looked at me with tired eyes. "She bought my property 3 months later for half what it was worth, turned it into an organic garden for her mansion. That night, lying on the thin jail mattress, I realized I was dealing with more than just a greedy neighbor. This was someone who was systematically erasing rural culture and replacing it with suburban pretension." Earl's story explained everything: the fake HOA, the phony inspectors, the carefully orchestrated arrest. Bethany was running a sophisticated con game designed to force people to sell their property cheap. But Earl had also given me something valuable: knowledge of her pattern, and the understanding that this was bigger than just my ranch. The thing about people like her, he'd said before lights out, is they get greedy. They always push too far because they think they're smarter than everyone else. She's been getting away with this for so long that she's gotten careless. If someone was smart enough to document everything and patient enough to let her hang herself, she could be stopped. When they released me 48 hours later for lack of evidence, I drove straight home to survey the damage. Sure enough, there were signs that someone had been on my property while I was gone. Footprints around my barn, a small camera mounted on a tree that definitely hadn't been there before, and my mailbox had been opened and rifled through. Bethany was watching me, probably hoping I'd do something stupid that she could use against me. Instead, I was going to give her exactly what she wanted to see: a defeated man ready to give up. But first, I needed to level the playing field. I drove to the electronics store in town and bought 4 small security cameras, the kind designed for home surveillance. I spent the rest of the day installing them in hidden locations around my property, inside my barn, under the eaves of my house, mounted in trees where they wouldn't be easily spotted. If Bethany was going to spy on me, I was going to return the favor, and then I was going to set a trap that would expose her for exactly what she was: a criminal who thought she was too smart to get caught. Earl had given me the key insight I needed. She'd gotten away with this scheme because she was arrogant and believed she was untouchable. That arrogance would be her downfall, and I was going to make sure she paid not just for what she'd done to me, but for what she'd done to Earl and God knows how many others. The next morning, I called Bethany with defeat in my voice. "Bethany, this is Clay. I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I just can't fight this anymore. The legal fees, the stress, the problems with my neighbors, it's too much. If you're still interested in buying my ranch, maybe we can work something out." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Then I heard her take a sharp breath, like she was trying to control her excitement. "Oh, Clay, I'm so sorry you've been going through such a difficult time. I'd love to help you find a solution that works for everyone." Her voice was dripping with fake sympathy, but I could hear the triumph underneath. She was at my ranch within an hour, practically bouncing with joy as she climbed out of her Tesla. She'd brought a leather portfolio filled with documents, and had clearly come prepared to close a deal immediately. "I'm so glad you called," she said as we sat at my kitchen table. "I think this is going to be wonderful for both of us. I can offer you a fair price that will let you start fresh somewhere new, and I can finally create the expanded garden space I've been dreaming about." What she didn't know was that I had my phone recording in my shirt pocket and 2 hidden cameras capturing every word she said. I played my part perfectly, acting like a broken man who just wanted out of this nightmare. As we talked about price and timeline, Bethany became increasingly comfortable and confident. That's when her mask started to slip. "You know, Clay, I have to admire your determination. Most people give up much faster than you did. I've done this with 3 other properties in the area, and usually people cave after the first arrest." My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. 3 other properties? She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, yes, there was that horse ranch, a small farm that grew organic vegetables, and a little place that raised goats for cheese. All of them were perfect for my expansion plans, but the owners were so stubborn about selling. I decided to push a little deeper, playing the curious, defeated neighbor. "Wow, you've really got this figured out. How many times have you done something like this?" Bethany's eyes lit up with pride. "Oh, who's counting? 4, 5, maybe 6 projects? Every time there's some rundown little operation dragging down property values, there's an opportunity to upgrade the neighborhood." She laughed like she just told a clever joke. "I like to call it community asset restructuring. They sell low, I maximize the land value, everyone wins, as long as they cooperate." The more she talked, the more she revealed. She bragged about how she'd hired actors to pose as inspectors, how she'd carefully researched HOA laws to find loopholes, how she'd developed relationships with certain neighbors who would sign whatever documents she put in front of them. "The key is making everything look legitimate," she explained, like she was giving me a master class in fraud. Trust official-looking paperwork and government authority. They don't question it until it's too late. She even admitted to having surveillance cameras installed around the properties she was targeting, so she could gather ammunition for her harassment campaigns. "The beautiful thing about the HOA strategy," she continued, completely caught up in her own cleverness, "is that it's almost impossible to fight. Most people don't understand the legal system well enough to challenge it effectively, and by the time they figure out what's happening, They're already drowning in fines and legal fees. She leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile. I've turned property acquisition into a science. Find the target, establish authority, create pressure, collect the assets. It's like a business formula. But then something went wrong. As Bethany was explaining how she'd manipulated the evidence in my arrest, she noticed one of my security cameras mounted under the eave of my porch. Her face went white, and her confident demeanor cracked like a broken mirror. "Clay, is that camera recording us right now?" I looked up casually. "Oh, that? Yeah, I installed some security cameras after my arrest. For protection." She stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "How long have those been there? Were they recording when I was here before?" The panic in her voice was unmistakable. "Bethany, is there a problem? I thought you said everything you've been doing is perfectly legitimate. Something about community asset restructuring, right?" But she was already grabbing her portfolio and backing toward the door. "You son of a bitch," she snarled, and for the first time I saw the real person behind the sweet facade. "You think you're clever, but you have no idea who you're messing with. I've been doing this for years, and I always win. Always." She pointed a finger at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You're going to regret this, Clay. I promise you that." As she stormed out to her Tesla, I smiled for the first time in weeks. She'd just confessed to running a systematic fraud operation on camera, and she knew it. That night, I made copies of the recordings and stored them in multiple secure locations. I also called Deputy Collins and told him I had important evidence related to several recent arrests in the area. I didn't give him details over the phone, but I arranged to meet with him the next morning. What I didn't tell him was that I was expecting Bethany to make one final desperate move to silence me. Someone that arrogant and that scared would do something stupid, and when she did, I'd be ready for her. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for her to spring it. At 1:30 in the morning, my security system started sending alerts to my phone. Someone was moving around my property, and it wasn't a wandering cow. I grabbed my phone and watched the live feed from my hidden cameras as Bethany Drake, dressed in all black, crept across my pasture carrying a backpack and what looked like a small chainsaw. She was moving carefully, trying to stay in the shadows, but my infrared cameras caught every step she took. This was it. She was about to hand me all the evidence I needed to destroy her completely. I immediately called Deputy Collins and told him to get over here fast, but to come quietly so she wouldn't run before he could arrest her. I watched in amazement as Bethany systematically began sabotaging my ranch. First, she cut several sections of my fence, creating gaps that would let my cattle wander onto the road where they could cause serious accidents. Then she poured what smelled like gasoline around the base of my barn and near my hay storage. She used a hammer to damage my water pump and broke the lock on my cattle gate. Every action was being recorded in high definition from multiple angles. This wasn't just trespassing or minor vandalism. This was attempted arson and destruction of property that could have killed my animals or caused a serious traffic accident. She was methodical and thorough, like she'd done this before. But Bethany wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the damage, probably planning to claim that I'd created these safety hazards myself as evidence of my unstable mental state. Then she made a call that I could hear clearly through my audio surveillance system. "This is Bethany Drake. I need to report an emergency at the Dempsey Ranch on Meadowbrook Road. The owner appears to be having some kind of breakdown. He's damaged his own property and created dangerous conditions. I'm concerned he might hurt himself or someone else." She was actually calling in a false emergency report, probably hoping to get me arrested again while the evidence of her sabotage was fresh. The audacity of her plan was breathtaking. She was destroying my property and then trying to frame me for it. That's when I made my own phone call. "Deputy Collins, this is Clay Dempsey. Remember that evidence I mentioned? Well, I'm watching Bethany Drake commit multiple felonies on my property right now, and it's all being recorded. You might want to get over here before she finishes burning down my barn." Mike's voice snapped to attention immediately. "Clay, are you serious? She's there right now?" I described exactly what I was seeing, and he told me to stay inside and keep recording while he and another deputy headed my way. Within minutes, I could see police lights in the distance, racing down the country road toward my ranch. Bethany was still pouring gasoline when the police cars came roaring up my driveway with their lights flashing and sirens wailing. The look of absolute terror on her face when those spotlights hit her was worth every moment of stress she'd put me through. She tried to run, still carrying the gas can, but stumbled in her black clothes and fell face first into the mud. Deputy Collins and his partner were on her before she could get back up. wrestling the gas can away and cuffing her hands behind her back. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, attempted arson, destruction of property, and filing a false police report." The contrast between her mud-covered, defeated appearance and her usual pristine white outfits was almost poetic. As they loaded Bethany into the patrol car, she completely lost control. The polished, sophisticated facade cracked completely, and what came out was ugly and desperate. "You don't understand," she screamed at the deputies. "I'm trying to improve this neighborhood. These people are ruining property values. I have every right to protect my investment." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming. Hours of recorded footage showing her systematically vandalizing my property and then calling in false reports to frame me for her crimes. She continued ranting even as they drove her away, her voice echoing across the quiet countryside like the cries of a trapped animal. The next morning brought a parade of neighbors who came to apologize and ask how they could help. Mrs. Johnson brought fresh baked bread and a tearful confession about signing Bethany's HOA papers without reading them carefully. "She seemed so nice and professional," she said. "She had all these official documents and talked about protecting our property values. I had no idea she was planning something like this." Old Jim Patterson showed up with his tools to help me repair the fence damage, shaking his head and muttering about city folks who think money gives them the right to control everyone else. Even people I'd never met before stopped by to express their support and share their own stories about Bethany's harassment. It turned out she'd been targeting several families in the area, using variations of the same scam to try to force them to sell their land cheap. The legal consequences for Bethany came swift and hard. The district attorney's office was very interested in my recorded evidence, especially since it connected her to multiple cases of fraud and harassment going back several years. She was charged with attempted arson, criminal mischief, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, and running an illegal extortion scheme. The fake HOA was dissolved immediately, and all the fines and fees she'd collected were ordered to be returned to the victims. Her bail was set at $50,000, and she was prohibited from contacting any of her victims while awaiting trial. The prosecutor told me they had enough evidence to put her away for several years, thanks to her recorded confession and the video of her sabotage. But the real justice came from the community response. Word spread quickly about what Bethany had done, and her reputation was destroyed overnight. The other wealthy newcomers who'd initially admired her sophistication now wanted nothing to do with her. Local businesses refused to serve her. Her mansion went up for sale within a month, but nobody wanted to buy a house owned by the neighborhood's most notorious criminal. She left Texas entirely, reportedly moving back to California to live with relatives, while facing multiple lawsuits from her victims. The property she'd worked so hard to acquire was eventually sold at a loss to cover her legal fees and victim restitution. As for me, I got my ranch back and then some. The county apologized for the harassment and expedited all my permits for future improvements. Several of my neighbors offered to buy hay and milk directly for me, creating new income streams that made my operation more profitable than ever. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes when someone tries to destroy your life, the best revenge is simply letting them destroy themselves. Bethany thought she could use the law and her money to steal my ranch. But she forgot that the truth and high-definition cameras are the most powerful weapons of all. Today, I'm still here on Sunrise Ranch, still getting up at 5 to milk the cows, still fixing whatever breaks, still watching the sunrise over the pasture where my cattle graze peacefully. The only difference is the small sign I put up next to my driveway. This property is under 24-hour video surveillance, just in case another Karen decides to try their luck. Because I learned that sometimes the quiet, peaceful folks are the ones you really don't want to mess with. We might be patient, but we're not pushovers. And when we fight back, we do it smart. Bethany Drake thought she could use intimidation and fraud to take everything I'd worked for. Instead, she lost everything she had and handed me a story that I'll be telling for the rest of my life. The ranch is still here, the cows are still giving milk, And I'm still the same guy who just wants to live peacefully on his own land. But now I know that sometimes you have to be willing to fight for peace. And sometimes, if you're patient and smart enough, you can make the bullies defeat themselves.
Appreciate you sticking with us at QA Stories. Hit that bell so you never miss a moment, because things only get crazier from here.